So Hearthstone's latest nerfs and buffs have been officially revealed, and I think maybe Paladin is just getting murdered. So many big changes to Paladin. Let's run through each of these so you can see them, then we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail. Tigress Plushie is going from 3 to 4 mana. Deputization Aura is going from +3 attack to +1 attack. The big change, I think, Shroomskavate is losing Wind Fury, getting a little cheaper, but no longer that crazy Wind Fury threat. Moving over to Hunter, Awakening Trimmers is now going to give you 3 1s instead of 4 1s. Thrall's Gift is going to give you a Lightning Storm instead of a Lightning Bolt. Big implication for Nature Shaman, Spell Damage Shaman. Aftershocks is going to go to 5 mana instead of 4. Important for Warrior with Acolyte of Pain. Odin Prime Designate is going to 9 mana. Control Warrior looking like a pretty good deck, particularly at high ranks. Of course, Odin's been very good for a while, as we know. And Ziliax getting nerfed. The ticking module portion, the one that gets cheaper with more minions in play, is going from 4 to 5 mana. Now, we also got 2 buffs. Sky Mother Aviana going from 6 to 5, so a bit cheaper. And Frostlich Cross Stitch going from 5 to 4, but also losing a point of damage, now only dealing 3. So all in all, I think some notably important cards getting changed, obviously. Odin is crazy, Nature Shaman getting pulled back, Hunter, Paladin in particular here just getting a lot of big changes, I think. So let's actually talk about these in a little bit more detail. Tigress Plushie to 4. I mean, this makes sense. This card always looked so insane. As soon as it revealed, it was like, oh, that's just a Ziliax most of the time for 3 mana. Like, yeah, it doesn't have Magnetize like Ziliax did, but most of the time you just played Ziliax as a 3/2 very often in many decks. They weren't like running mech packages necessarily. So Tigress Plushie was just a Ziliax that gave you a mini Ziliax, which of course, when played with things like Deputization Aura and other buffs and such, and Paladin hand buffs in particular, it was just so much efficiency, not just survivability and life gain, but reacting to the board and developing threats. A 3/2 with Divine Shield's not a terrible threat development when you've got buffs and follow-ups that are crazy. So I think pushing this to 4 puts it in a much more realistic space. In fact, I still actually think it's a good card at 4. I think Paladin may have to shift a little bit of their focus away from lethality so much, because with Shroomskavate going away in particular, they're not going to have like Leroy Wind Fury lethality sorts of things. They might have to push the curve of the deck around a little bit to make sure they've got the kind of meat on the bone necessary to get there. At the same time, they may actually have to move a little bit quicker too and play actual more early game minions instead of that sort of mid-range power band with all the buffing stuff that currently happens, particularly in hand buff lists. So nonetheless, this is I think a healthy change for the card. It just seemed way too efficient, particularly with Miniaturize at 3. So next up is Deputization Aura going from 3 attack to 1 attack, and this is a really significant change. I mean, you're talking about cutting away 2/3 of the upside of the attack. And while the lifesteal is certainly relevant to this card, I don't want to discount the importance of the lifesteal. It does matter sometimes. That plus attack is really what most paladins are excited about with this one. Sometimes that's just extra face damage. Sometimes that helps you trade in on board with rush minions really effectively. You know, you got like the mini from Tigress Plushie used to hit for 4 with a Deputization Aura, which could be insane. And this like 1-2 punch in particular, like Plushie into mini, with Deputization Aura, you know, being able to set off on each of those was like crazy big swings on board sometimes. Now with only +1, that is a huge fall off. A mini hitting for 2 instead of 4 is a really big difference. And of course, this doesn't push nearly as much face damage, doesn't heal as much. I mean, you're basically cutting the card down to 1/3 of its former impact. And like the lifesteal is still good because, you know, if you play, you know, a 5 attack minion on board, you're still getting, you know, 6 points of lifesteal, whereas before, you know, you would have gotten 8. So that doesn't feel like, you know, cutting down by 2/3. But the smaller things is a more significant portion overall, and the bonus is getting cut in 2/3. So sometimes it just won't feel worth it, I'm sure. As I see Paladin, you know, I don't play a lot of Paladin right now, but when I play against it right now, Deputization Aura is terrifying. This new version, I don't feel like it would be very terrifying. I'd be like, oh, okay, just +1 attack, that's no big deal. Some decks certainly care more about the lifesteal if you're a hunter or whatever, but other matchups and scenarios, this card just feels like a shell, I think, of its former self at +1 attack. Speaking of a shell of its former self, my god, Shroomskavate here absolutely gutted, I think. Give a minion Wind Fury Divine Shield. Now just give a minion Divine Shield. They did make it cheaper, thank god. But that Wind Fury is really what made this card so crazy. And don't get me wrong, I think it was dangerously good. I think it needed to be changed. I think the Wind Fury was too scary and too powerful and too lethal. So I'm glad this change exists. But I do think this certainly makes the card notably weaker and really won't even be played for the same reasons. I don't think, you know, give a minion Divine Shield and Excavate's necessarily a bad effect for 2 mana, because we do know Excavating can be really valuable, but it's going to be probably different sorts of environments and decks that care about the new version of Shroomskavate as it's played today, of course, and the decks that are playing it today are going to have to completely reshape themselves. It's things like, you know, Leroy Lethals with Wind Furies aren't as meaningful. Crazy stat buffs on board can't turn into lethals as quickly without Wind Fury, right? So the whole makeup of Paladin probably has to shift because it is focused so much on using this card as a finisher, and of course the new version doesn't do that at all. So maybe still a solid card in some ways, just not remotely the same card at all, and will be used in completely different sorts of decks and game plans. Moving on to Hunter, Awakening Trimmers going down to 3-1. I think this is a totally fine change. Sometimes those Trimmers, if they got uncontested, could just overwhelm you. 3-1 is still good, still relevant. You know, it's still very threatening for Hunter. Still can play nicely, you know, with some of the wide board stuff. It is a little bit worse with Observer of Myth from time to time, because that requires you to summon, you know, higher attack things. These get pulled down a little bit. So some of that crazy wide board attack buff from Observer of Myth might go away with these Trimmers. But on their own, you know, still pretty nice threats, I think. Still pretty relevant. I think this still gets played a lot. Just pulls a little bit of that power level down, which is fine. Spell Hunter has been pretty good, especially at middle to low ranks. Moving on to Thrall's Gift here, losing Lightning Bolt and getting Lightning Storm instead, which is a big hit potentially to Nature Spell Damage Shaman. You saw me play here, where you're getting that Lightning Bolt, probably slinging it face for 5+ damage, and it probably costs 0. You know, Thrall's Gift wasn't necessarily the best part of that deck, because you do have to pay 1 for the Thrall's Gift, because it's not a nature spell, whereas all of your other things you're discounting with Flash of Lightning. And that did make Thrall's Gift sometimes awkward to weave in, but I still found myself using it a ton. It just adds redundancy, adds extra lightning bolts into the mix, and usually you had a couple spare mana anyway, because you're like spending a few mana on some spell damage stuff. Everything else is free. It's like, well, I got a couple mana anyway. Thrall's Gift is not going to hurt, and it's like, you know, bonus 5. It's also, you know, sometimes feeds into the Crash of Thunder discounts as well, because, you know, you need that lightning bolt to discount. So it does feel like an important part of the deck. Can the deck get through it? I think so. You know, the deck can probably do things anyway, get there anyway, just maybe needs a little more time or a little more card draw, but probably still a really lethal Nature Shaman deck. But this card gets kind of more interesting for like control shamans. You know, now you have an AoE, you have single target removal, and you still have something that can kind of turn the corner as well. So keep an eye out for Thrall's Gift. You know, in like Highlander shamans, slower shamans, this might be even more interesting than it was before, because the Lightning Bolt didn't offer a lot of utility, whereas Lightning Storm certainly does. Aftershocks going up to 5 mana from 4. This one surprised me a little bit. You know, it's a good card. I mean, very quickly we identified, hey, this is a great card. 2 mana, you know, AoE like this is awesome. Sometimes it's valuable to have that AoE spread across multiple hits as well. You know, that's all great. The problem really, though, I think, was that Warrior started using this as an Acolyte of Pain enabler for like crazy effective card draw. So what they could do is draw a bunch of cards and remove the opponent's board all at once, which I think just packed too much punch into a single card. So, you know, a 3 mana Acolyte and 2 mana Aftershocks, that's a crazy turn 5 that like resets the board, fills your hand. That's just too good. So Shaman might be suffering a little bit here for the sins of Warrior. But I think this is a reasonable change, all things considered, because the power level on this card is just really high. And when you're able to extract extra bonuses out of it with things like Acolyte of Pain, that probably just pushes it a little far past the edge of what is reasonable. And I think actually still a pretty good card at 5. I think there'll be many instances where playing this for 3 still feels very, very good. Even on turn 3, and certainly weaving it in later as well. So moving on to Odin, getting pushed up to 9 mana. And this is very reasonable. Control warrior, as it's called on HS Replay, but really Odin, armor warrior is very good. Like high tier 2, practically tier 1, top legend, still pretty solid across the ladder as well. And it's been good for a while. Odin is just such a well-defined win condition that's both defensive and aggressive. Weirdly, building decks for so much life gain while also doing crazy damage does tend to feel unmanageable for many decks and game plans. So slowing him down gives other decks more time to either directly counter him or just kill the opponent before he gets down. Also just makes them commit, a bigger, more important turn to this. There's been many instances where, I was playing like Zarimi Priest. It's like, I dare you to play your Odin. I'm just going to kill you. Or, Nature Shaman, whatever else. If you pass this turn and you don't gain life or deal with this board, you're just going to die. And I think those moments will happen more often at 9, slowing this deck down just a little bit. Still probably pretty good win condition for slower matchups, but ultimately a slightly healthier spot, I'd guess. Moving on to Ziliax, the ticking module going up to 5. I think this is probably the most commonly played Ziliax that I've seen, or at least this half of it. I was playing it in Ziliax Zarimi Priest to great effect, where you were putting this down to 0 and then copying it and playing like 2 or 3 of these alongside a Zarimi. That is just so gross. I actually think that'll still happen a lot even at 5. This will still be a card that's pretty easy to cheat into play effectively, and some of the effects that can go with this, buffing your board or whatever, can be really effective when played so cheaply. So this is a very reasonable change because this card feels completely busted when it's played so affordably, but I think it will actually still feel a bit busted even with this change, and still look really good. So fine, reasonable adjustment here, but maybe not even enough. I think Ziliax still stays really, really good. Moving on to the buffs here, Sky Mother Aviana going down to 5 from 6. This helps, right? This is like, yeah, okay, it's not as bad to weave this in now, but ultimately most people are saying the payoff on this card is just not worth it, right? So many bad random legendaries with like really specific effects or synergistic things you can't really take advantage of. So ultimately putting some bad draws in your deck isn't necessarily a good thing. Maybe there's always worlds where you can do stuff in fatigue and so on, but at the end of the day, this card just doesn't seem like it has a really positive synergistic bonus. So, why play it at 5 if you're not, 6 versus 5 is like, what's the difference? Nobody's going to play this at 5 right now either. Although I'll certainly try to make it work. I just don't have a lot of faith. So finally, Frost Lich Cross Stitch, that's how you say it, going to 4 mana, but losing a point of damage going down to 3. I think it could have stayed at 4 and it would have been fine. Yes, a water elemental costs 4, I know, but there's a conditionality built into this. 4 damage is just not that crazy. Water elementals don't feel like 4 cost minions anymore. So, I don't know, like Flanking Strike is how many years old, and it dealt 3 and summoned a 3/3. So it's like, yeah, this is a little better, but you gotta kill the character as well. Would it have really hurt this to stay at 4? I don't think this makes the difference as a 4 cost card. I still don't think this really gets played. Maybe in like Reno decks, you just need enough cards. It kind of makes the cut. Kill a 3/3, summon a water elemental's fine. I don't hate it. I just could have maybe pushed this one a little more if you actually wanted it to be a really significant change, but maybe I'll be wrong. Certainly happened before. Yeah, there you go. I think ultimately some pretty big changes. A few of them might feel small, on their own. 1 mana here, 1 mana there, whatever. But the Paladin changes in particular are just, there's a lot of them, and I think they just totally change how the deck plays to some extent. So that alone is certainly going to have a cascading impact on the meta and what it looks like. So I don't know what to expect moving forward, but I think things will be very different. I'm not much in love with these buffs. I don't think they do a lot, but Paladin opens up some different lines. So curious to hear your thoughts on these. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.